It's going to be fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. Let me just add in. This is Jim Monaghan. For a lot of people in the audience, what you just saw there might be a bit dry. There's a lot of figures. There's a lot of facts. That we're here for the facts and figures, but we thought best on the panel we get somebody who's energetic and poetic and a little bit cynical on it as well.
I'm not going to dance.
Jim Monaghan is a pro-independence member of Scottish Labour. He's a former researcher for the Scottish Parliament. He was a media coordinator for Solidarity before 2007. Was a press and strategy advisor for the Scottish Labour during the 2012 council elections. He's a member of the National Collective, and most importantly, for me and some of the guys here, he's a poet as well.
May get a poem at the end.
We're definitely going to get a poet at the end. Right, ladies and gentlemen, the Q&A starts right here.
I just want to thank Crawford and Kevin and the team for organising this, and for Cherryman Media for the incredible technical setup here as well. And to Michelle and Ivan for the excellent presentation we had in the first part of it, which I'm sure gave us plenty of food for thought and plenty of ideas for questions. Yeah. But before we open up to the floor for questions for yourselves, I want to ask you a couple of questions as well, just through a show of hands. Do we have any people in here who are undecided about a referendum? That's quite a few as well. Are there any no voters in here? One or two. Are there any yes but cynical? That's good. That's quite a few as well. And any people who are yes voters who have completely made their minds up already? That seems to be the majority as well. So we're kind of at least 50% preaching to the converted. But so first thing we're going to do is just open up to the floor, and I want to see has Andy got a specific question to ask to either Ivan or Michelle? The guy in the front there, in the middle there, sorry.
Yeah, I've got a question. Sorry. Just before we get...
Sorry, hang on for the mic. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, there's a mic. Yeah.
One of the goals that was mentioned at the start of the group was for a greener Scotland in the future. Bearing in mind there's systemic problems in the UK system, such as connection costs, that make it cheaper to set a connection to, say, an Essex coal station than a tidal energy system in the Pentland Firth. What possibilities do you see in an independent Scotland for both a green energy job creation and also just businesses as a whole?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the broader picture, I think there's a few things. First of all, there's obviously a strategic intent. You've already seen the Scottish Government in terms of the amount of renewables that's there. Secondly, because of where we are, there's a phenomenal opportunity for wind, offshore wind, but mainly for tidal in the long term, because it's not even the fact that Scotland's got this huge coastline, it's the fact of where it is, and twice a day the North Atlantic empties into the North Sea and back again, and there's very few countries that have got such a tremendous potential for tidal. So there's that, and from an industrial point of view, it's all about exploiting that and putting in companies that can build the technology, so nurturing the inventors, if you like, and the entrepreneurs at the early stages, and then building the indigenous supply chains, companies that can manufacture the bits for that technology as we go forward. So that, in terms of the energy it generates and in terms of what it can do for an industrial base, is a tremendous opportunity you've really got to exploit. So I think the green thing is there. It's not a airy-fairy tree-hugging type of thing. It's a real thing with real jobs and real money and a real economy behind it. And then you can export all of that technology once you've developed it, which is great. I must admit, I'm not an expert on connection costs, but clearly if that's an area, and it will be, that is hindering the development of that, then you're going to be in a much better position when it's in a Scottish-only environment to focus on solutions for that and make investments for solutions for that, without a doubt.
Is there anyone else with any other questions on a similar vein on greener Scotland and green energy? The man down the front there, David.
Thank you. It's not so much a question, it's just in response to that. I used to work for Centrica, can I dare admit that? And connection charges are political as much as economic. Ofgem has stood out against lowering connection charges in Scotland And you'll be pleased to know it costs less to put a windmill on top of the Houses of Parliament than it does in Scotland. Funny that, isn't it? So again, it comes back to politics as much as economics. And if we have developed these green energies, the rest of the UK and indeed Europe will want to buy them from us.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else on that subject? Or?
I'm not very clear. I know that oil revenue goes, all the money from that goes down south. If we do develop renewables and we don't end up saying yes, what happens to the revenue that is produced from wave and wind power in
It'll
Scotland?
be the same.
It'll be the same, so all
Yeah,
that
yeah,
goes to
absolutely, yeah.
Westminster.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, all corporation tax goes to Westminster. At the
That's
moment,
kind of
yeah.
what I thought, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
So we might develop this fabulous green energy
Uh-huh.
sort of industry, and all that money will go down south.
Correct.
Thank you.
Would there be a role for... Oh, sorry, is it man at the front there?
Just to amplify just to amplify a wee bit on the connection charges, tidal power, etc., etc. We need to always remember that technology moves on, markets move on, and it could well come that within a few years Scotland will be able to afford to build its own interconnector to Europe and sell directly. It's going to cost an awful lot in copper wire at the moment, right? But if we work hard and use the money properly, invest it, reinvest back into our own infrastructure, we can be selling tidal power direct to Europe. We're not going to be bothered about what any national grid connection charge is going to be. The possibilities are endless. Let's grab them.
And I was wondering about the ownership of it, though. We hear a lot now about the big six energy companies, and that's part of the problem. And they're geared up for profit, which is not a bad thing in itself. But would there be a role, do you think, for more sort of socially owned or locally owned energy generation in an independent Scotland?
Potentially, yeah. Aye. I mean, all of that stuff's there to be done, and one of the great things about the step we'll take by voting yes is it gets all of that kind of stuff on the table, and there's opportunities then to look at all of this.
This is a bit of a simple thing. I heard a long time ago that in Scotland we've got a power station which is inside a mountain, the Hollow Mountain, right? What's it called? And it's only switched on days like Christmas Day when everybody's roasting a turkey for 5 hours, and it's only switched on when the other power stations can't handle the use. Am I right in saying that's the case? And why is that not on all the time? Is that just a myth?
It is on all the time, actually. Aye.
Is it on all the time? There goes my question.
Nuclear power stations are producing. They're running that backwards and they're phasing. At night, when the nuclear power stations are still producing, because you don't turn them off, right? They run that power to Cruachan, and it basically pumps the water out of Loch Awe up into the hill. And then through the day, at half time, when everybody rushes to put their kettles on, just open the taps at Cruachan and whammo, instant power. It's been well used.
Again, it's something that I heard recently. The inventors that you're talking about for future sustainability, for renewables, what they were saying is there's 4 years full power left in the UK with the coal mines, etc., that we've got just now, the coal fuel power. What will happen to the national grid if we go independent? Because what they were saying is obviously priority is going to go to business, to economy, to industry, what power is left, and then there'll be power curfews, and it'll be the Scottish Highlands that suffer first. And these power curfews, these are quite realistic figures. They've been predicting them for over 20 years. The renewables that we've got now is going to take about 20 years to develop that. So what happens in that interim if we're in an independent Scotland?
It's kind of the reverse, because the reality at the moment, you think about England's 2% of the population, or the rest of the UK is. So that's where the bulk of the energy consumption is. So Scotland's exporting energy south. So when you got to remember that in context. So if anybody's going to run out of power it's not going to be
south
us
first.
unless, if you think it the other way around, if it's independent Scotland, then you've got some more control of that, right? And if it's still the UK, then you don't. So in terms of energy security, Scotland's in a better place than the rest of the UK. It's less risky.
And of course the lights won't go out because you'll import it from somewhere else. I mean, there's no way that we're going to let the lights go out. That's I've been hearing that for, as you say, in 20 years or something like that, but it hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay, moving on to energies. Anyone else with a fresh question? Moving it back there, Dave.
Looking the wrong way. It's a question for Ivan. You mentioned that, you said that we're generating more in terms of tax, and given there's more unemployment and deprivation, where is it coming from? And is that likely to change after a devolution, after independence rather?
Where is the tax revenue coming from?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the numbers I went through, clearly the oil industry is part of that. If you take the oil industry out of that, then, as I said, the GDP is basically the same in Scotland as in the UK average. So the extra bit we've got is the oil and gas. Without that, we're at the same level as the UK average. And where does it come from? I mean, there are a lot of strengths in the Scottish economy. There's still manufacturing, the whisky industry is huge, renewables is growing, life sciences, food and drink, other than whisky, the fisheries, etc., etc. So there's a lot of pockets of strength still there. And you've got to remember there's large parts of the rest of the UK that are in pretty bad shape as well. I mean, there's large swathes in North England and South Wales, etc., that are in pretty bad shape. So when they average it out, you look at it, London in the South East is always number one, and Scotland is number two. It's kind of the way the wealth generation pans out. I mean, you saw it in that chart that was showed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose one thing I'd add to it as well, that's just looking at the historic numbers from GERS. But you also need to remember when Scotland is independent and has this all-important control over additional fiscal levers, it can make decisions and choices to actively increase productivity. So there's a figure today in the white paper in terms of a new industrial strategy. Increasing productivity by just 1% would result in 21,000 additional jobs. So these figures that we're talking about and the relative strength is just on today's numbers as part of the UK. Imagine how much more powerful it would be with all these additional fiscal levers.
But how would we go about increasing productivity by 1%? How would that be? How would that happen within an independent Scotland that doesn't happen now?
So if you look at it, to my mind, it's about focusing on your priorities and actively promoting them in terms of where do you want to boost. So at the moment, it's like the two sides of the same coin. We hear a lot from the UK government about people who are, on welfare benefits, for example. They're not working, and therefore they're not able to contribute taxes, focusing on specific sectors of the community, focusing on specific sectors of business or industry, and creating incentives, be it tax incentives, for example, can increase productivity. And there's no reason why the Scottish Government wouldn't choose to do that, because actually people in work are contributing to their families, are contributing to society, and of course they are paying tax as well.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember that if you're the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, you're under huge political pressure all the time to make the books, generate as much revenue as you can, and pay for what you need to pay for. And the easiest way to do that historically is to support the financial services sector and build up the City of London. So that is where the focus has been. And it's very, very short-term focus, but what it means is when they make the decision about to invest in some longer-term stuff to get the industrial base sorted out, or to just crank the handle and ramp up the financial services sector a bit more and try and make that more attractive and get some more revenue out of there, then in the short term, where they've got a focus electorally, that's kind of where they go. If you look at the UK's manufacturing base was 30% of the economy, more than 30% of the economy back in the 60s and early 70s, it's now 12%. You look at countries across Europe, it's also reduced, but by nothing like as much. Germany still 20-odd%, Finland, Sweden, etc. still 20-odd%. So they've had policies that have recognised the long-term benefit of keeping industries alive, whereas in the UK it's all been about how do we get the money as fast as possible, and the fastest way to do that has always been from financial services.
Okay. The man at the bar there, Dave? Or was it no you who's got the mic, Dave? Sorry.
Unfortunately, the more that I speak, the more everyone will realise that I'm English. So I'm sorry for that, but Scotland's my home. Scotland's my home now, so I ask this question on behalf of Scotland. The thing that worries me is a currency union. I think there's a very significant difference between a country or a government that is a sovereign currency issuer that controls its own currency and a country that uses another currency. When you're a sovereign currency issuer, like the United Kingdom or the United States or Japan, you cannot become insolvent, you cannot default on your debts, nobody is going to bounce your checks. And that's evident in the market, because when people want to invest in United Kingdom debt, people will take any price. That's why we can put interest rates so low. That's why our debt, United Kingdom debt and US debt and Japanese debt, is euphemistically called risk-free investment. People will always buy it. It's true. It's true. Now that's different and that's because we can't default on our debt. All of our pension funds invest in United Kingdom debt because it's risk-free. The United Kingdom government will not default on it. Now contrast that with Eurozone members, such as Spain, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Portugal. Those governments literally, like all of us in our households, literally have to earn every penny they spend. That's not the case for the United Kingdom. It's not the case for the United States. It's not the case for Japan. They can print money if they want, or they can control the interest rates and use their central bank to borrow the money, in quotes, to spend as much as they want. And in that sense, they can ride bad times, like the present, and spend more and have deficits. And that's why I don't think the comparison with the UK government deficit and the sort of notional Scottish deficit is valid, because the notional Scottish deficit is based upon Scotland being a currency user, not a currency issuer, which it currently is as part of the United Kingdom government. A 7.9% deficit, or whatever it is that the United Kingdom government has got, I don't think there's much of a problem with that. A 5% deficit for a country that does not control its own currency, like Greece or Spain or Italy, is a much bigger problem.
Okay, right, let me answer. That's quite a bit to unpick that. First of all, in terms of the English thing, you're very welcome. There's many members of Business for Scotland that are English. Gordon was born in England, yeah, as was Tony Banks. So in terms of there's quite a lot to unpick there. In terms of this thing about the UK is safe and it'll never go bust, I mean, it's fantasy. There's absolutely no logic behind that, right? Governments sell debt to raise money to pay for what they're spending, and that only goes on so long before people run out of patience with them. It'll only happen as long as you can roll the debt over and people are willing to pay for it. Now, talk about the Eurozone. Eurozone gets a lot of bad press. In terms of interest rates, the Eurozone interest rates at the moment are half of what the UK interest rates are. So people in Europe, the interest rates only 0.25%, and it's 0.5% in the UK. If you look at German economy, for example, or any of the North European economies, you'd be struggling to see there's a problem with them. If you go through Finland, countries in the Euro, Finland, Austria, Netherlands, etc., are doing just fine, and the Eurozone's been absolutely fine for them. The problem has been the diversity there between North and South and the range of what's going on. So governments getting into problems because they borrow too much money and they don't manage their economies properly. That's how they get into trouble. Now, in terms of the currency itself, the US is slightly different because they're the biggest in the world and they can do things in terms of managing the world economy, and they're the world reserve economy, world reserve currency. The euro is kind of partial reserve currency. It's the second reserve currency in the world. But the sterling itself, there's absolutely no reason why sterling wouldn't get into the UK government and sterling wouldn't get into serious trouble. There's nothing sacrosanct, there's nothing God-given about this wee island that happens to have sterling in terms of how it works, right? Most countries in the world have their own currency, and many of them have problems. So the fact you've got your own currency doesn't make you immune from having kind of problems. Zimbabwe's got their own currency, for example. So that doesn't mean that because you don't share a currency, doesn't mean you're safe. The fact about the decision about currency, there's a number of choices there. I mean, there's basically 4 choices. You can use sterling as And I think, to be fair, you've got to make the decision about, do you think we should become independent? And then there's a discussion about currency. The SNP government have set their stall out to say we will have sterling on day one. There's a lot of good reasons for that, which I'll go through. There's arguments about what you might want to do in future in terms of making your own currency or going into the euro, and those are perfectly valid points of view that people can present and talk about, and there may well be a discussion that in 10 or 20 years' time further down the road. The comparable currencies, if you talk about Scottish currency on its own, would be Norway, Denmark, Sweden, right? Now, the problem they've all got, they're all strong currencies. In the case of Norway and Sweden, they're very strong currencies, and the Swiss franc as well. So they've all got strong currencies. Denmark ties its currency to the euro, so as it floats with the euro, and it does that deliberately to prevent it appreciating too much. Strong currency sounds great. The problem with a strong currency is it undermines your manufacturing because you can't export. Your exports are too expensive. If you've been to Norway and try to buy a pint of beer, the reason it's expensive is because they've got such a strong currency. So that's a decision they've taken for their economy for historical reasons, and it works for them. Say Denmark's kind of slightly different. They've got their own currency, but they've pegged it to the euro. Other North European countries like Finland elected to go inside the euro, and that made sense for them. So this, you could look down the road and say it makes sense to have a Scottish currency. A Scottish currency would be stronger than sterling, no doubt about that, because it's petrol-backed. It'd be like the Norwegian krona. So it would be a strong currency. It'd be worth more than sterling. And again, that sounds great if you go on holiday, but it's difficult in terms of what it does to your industrial base, which, I mean, I do a lot of work in Sweden, and it's a big problem they've got. How do they export? How do they compete with other countries when somebody in Sweden working in a factory gets paid twice what somebody in Scotland gets paid working in a factory? So that's the logic about the position you want to take in terms of currency going forward. You've got options there. In terms of what is best as at independence and what makes sense for both sides, there's a few things kicking about there. The first is the obvious one, that you want to minimise the disruption. You don't want people to have to start thinking in a new currency and transacting in a new currency on day one, because it's going to disrupt things that, frankly, we don't need to disrupt. It works both ways. Scotland's biggest trading partner is England. England's second biggest trading partner after the UK is Scotland. So why would you put a currency barrier in there that's going to make trade difficult on both sides of the fence? And that's one of the reasons why the reality is, whatever anybody says, come independence, Scotland will stay with sterling, and the rest of the UK will be very happy for it to stay with sterling, because it won't cause all this disruption in terms of cross-border trade that's very significant, which would put jobs at risk, etc., if those barriers were in place in terms of companies in the rest of the UK. And the other thing that needs to be talked about is the balance of payments. Now, one of the reasons that supports the currency value is your balance of payments, which is the difference between what you export and what you import. Okay, the Chinese have got a huge problem. They're forever having to manage their currency artificially to keep it as low as possible, because if they let it float, it'd go through the ceiling compared to where it's at just now, because of their huge balance of payments surplus, because they basically export a bunch of stuff and import a lot less, and that's something they've got the opposite problem, trying to balance that. So if you've got a situation where you've got free trading currencies and you're exporting a lot more than you're importing, you're importing a lot more than you're exporting, and you've got a negative balance of payments, and you don't have it petrol-backed, then you've got a real problem, especially with debt levels like that. Now, if you look at the UK's balance of payments, minus 36 billion in the last financial year. Oil and whisky together are about 40 billion of exports. So if oil and whisky come out of the UK economy, the UK's negative balance of payments doubles overnight. So that's one very, very good reason why they won't allow that to happen.
There's a man at the front there was wanting to pick up the point there.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. I thought it was a very good question.
Good question.
And one of the things you said was that Eurozone interest rates are low.
They are.
Well, interest rates in Eurozone have got nothing to do with how much it costs you to borrow money in international money markets. That's why Spain and Ireland and all these other countries have such huge problems. Mm-hmm. They might have smaller deficits than us, but it costs them a fortune to borrow. And the cost of borrowing is not based on some logic, it's based on perception. So you might think Britain's not a safe bet and Scotland's a safe bet, but I have to tell you it's not based on that, it's based on perception. The US is perceived as a safe bet, the UK is perceived as a safe bet. It's very uncertain as to what... Could I finish my question?
Can you let the man finish, please?
The question is, would Scotland be perceived as a safe bet? I think there's some uncertainty around that, so please don't confuse interest rates in a country with how much it costs you to borrow money from one country to another.
I take the point. In terms of safety of the... Exactly. I mean, the credit rating. There's a funny leaflet still going around from the No campaign that says your mortgages are cheaper in the UK because we've got a AAA credit rating. And of course, they lost the AAA credit rating, but the leaflets are still kicking around. Countries.
When the US's credit rating declined, their borrowing costs didn't increase. It doesn't matter the credit rating, it's what the international market thinks you're worth.
Yeah, but that's a very good signal of the direction it's going in, right? Okay, if it wasn't important, then they wouldn't talk about it so much, and then when they lost it, they wouldn't try not to talk about it as much as possible. There's a number of countries, including Norway, etc., that do have AAA credit ratings and can borrow quite cheaply. One of the interesting things about the oil fund, when you look at the oil fund, Norway is able to invest the money from its oil fund and get a better interest rate on that than they could borrow at. So they could actually borrow money cheaper than they could invest their oil fund money, and they were getting 4, 5, 6% in certain years. In certain segments of that, it was in the portfolio, it was in double-digit returns. Is that not true?
We're not Norway.
Yeah, no, we're better than Norway.
We're entering this exercise.
You know what, listen.
We've got a share in the deficit, so you have to borrow in the international market to pay the deficit.
You understand that, right?
But surely the point
Here's
is, what
a
you're saying is there is a historical thing. It may see that Britain or US or any other country is seen as a safe bet now. There have been countries in the past that have been seen as safe bets that are no longer safe bets. There are countries that are safe bets now that will no longer be safe bets in the future.
You just have to ask yourself why Ireland with higher GDP and Spain with a bigger deficit are in
No, the UK's got a bigger deficit than Spain.
That's the point. But who's in difficulty? Because Spain's costing a fortune to borrow the money.
I actually think 1.3 trillion of debt is significant difficulty. Perhaps there's this kind of consideration around perception and you know, the UK has enjoyed significant successes in the world stage, but I think it's quite clear that that's declining, and I think it's rather naive, in my opinion, to say, well, because that's been the case, it'll always be the case. So if you look at some of the words that have been produced by the Fiscal Commission, they don't, so this is Nobel Prize winners around economics, they don't make the assumption because it's always been so in terms of borrowing in international markets, it will always continue to be so. The fact of the matter is that the UK economy is in a mess. And are we going to peg ourselves to that drowning elephant, or are we going to take control?
Can we have any other questions right now that are about the currency before we move on to another issue?
Yeah, well, we've been busy comparing countries here, but the fact of the matter remains that the entire Western world is being held to ransom by offshore banks that don't necessarily have to run by our law of the land and, like you say, running off maritime law. Now, all the money is, we're just paying debt out left, right and centre, and to stick with the pound is going to just end in disaster as far as I'm concerned. I will vote yes, I'm all for it, but keeping the pound is what's ultimately going to drag us down, and I believe that the only way to escape from all of this is to leave it all together. The Gordon Brown has sold all our gold. I don't know if he had much choice in the matter because of the debt we're in. Barack Obama shut down the government and they raised the debt levels, and they're only going to be in debt, in the black again until January, in which case they're going to have to go through the same thing again. Now, I'm suggesting that we have to leave the control of these central bankers, and there are ways of doing that. Now, you said there was various different options with the currencies. There is a new technology out there. It's called Bitcoin, and people are starting to use this. On Friday night there, I received a £1 payment from Hawaii on a Friday night. There was no bankers involved. There was no fees, or like very little fees. And essentially, it was pain free. You know, I can send cash from one person to another person as simply as sending an email. Now, what I'm saying is, even the gold markets have been manipulated. Fort Knox send their gold to China, who discovered that it's actually tungsten that's been gold plated, and they're like, well, where's our gold? Fort Knox can't even say where it is.
Are you suggesting that an independent Scotland should use the Bitcoin?
We should have gold, a gold-backed currency or a Bitcoin-backed currency. Wait and see, right? The Chinese Google have now started accepting Bitcoin, forcing the price through the roof. The US Senate's just had a hearing last week there because they're running scared, and they're thinking about adopting it. I say all the innovation has come from Scotland in the last so long. We had the Scottish Enlightenment, we've had all the technical innovations, all the real drive has come from Scotland and not England. And I'm saying that we can take this forward. And if we were to adopt something similar to that, we could become one of the richest nations in the world. What are your thoughts?
Anything else? Before I come back to the panel, can we have any other points on the currency, and we'll maybe address them all together? Or the women at the front there?
Sorry, I kind of forgot my point. But it was more about what this gentleman said here, and this gentleman said here about the currency, and I'm not sure I need maybe any clarification, but the idea that we're perceived, the UK is perceived as low risk with loans, and you're saying it's not necessarily related to the AAA rating, but isn't it related to the fact that we're oil rich? That is what backs up historically.
It's related to the fact that we control our own currency.
But isn't the currency
it's not worth anything, then.
What about other countries in the world that control their own currency?
Can we maybe take a few points? We'll hear a few points on the currency, and we'll maybe try and get them all together, and then we don't sort of veer too far from the subject on each individual point.
I meant to make this point like about 10 minutes ago, so I've probably forgotten half of it. But it was about perception, and the perception for a long time has been America, Britain, top of the tree. But from what I've been reading as a non-economist, is that...
As an economist.
Whatever, yeah. that's all changing. And the superpower idea, America is a superpower, that's actually changing now. And China, India, all these places, they're coming up. And the next 20, 30 years, I don't know, they will be the new superpowers in the world. So perception does change, and facts change, and the world is changing all the time.
Yeah. Anyone else on currency? I think there's somebody in the middle there.
Thanks. Just a question I asked earlier on. If Scotland gets independence and keeps the pound, can we get our own credit rating, or does it tie to the UK credit rating?
And I would like to add also, when we go to the world markets to borrow money, who is it we actually borrow from? Is it China, or is it individual funds?
It's a mixture of all of that, yeah.
So I don't know if you want to maybe try and take all these things together, if there's a kind of general... Was there another person there?
Something new to say?
As long as it's adding to the point and not just
repeating. Yeah, you're asking who we're borrowing from. Well, if you look at the debt of the United Kingdom, I think something in the region, I forget the actual numbers, something in the region of between 20 and 30% is debt to the Bank of England. So one branch of government borrowing from another branch of government. I'm not worried about that. I don't know if you are, but I'm not. If you discount that amount of debt, close to half of the debt that we have is pension funds. So all of us, anybody here who has a private pension, probably has an investment in UK government debt. The point is that the private sector, i.e. everybody who's not the government, us, want to save. We want to save. We want to invest. And when the government sells us our debt, it provides us with like I said before, euphemistically, a risk-free avenue for us to invest in. And when the government pays interest every month or every year, which was in your, the figures were in your talk, Ivan, that's coming to us. Pensioners, anybody who's claiming their pension are earning an income from the debt. I don't think 1.3 trillion is necessarily a big amount of debt. How do you decide that that's a big amount of debt? It's the UK government borrowing money from its own citizens. Yes, something like 20% or a quarter is going overseas. That is different. But the majority of it is owned by us.
There's a lot of stuff to
this is somewhat esoteric, this conversation. Let's go back to first principles. If it's so great, why have we got third world poverty in our children in some areas of Glasgow? Yeah? So going back to your point, currency generally, this kind of whole concept around a fiat currency, personally, there's some madness in the world, to my view. What we're talking about here is taking control to smooth the interim stage and allow Scotland to make her own choices. Unfortunately, it is a fact that the smaller countries have recovered more speedily from the current recession than the larger countries. And it's talking about us having the ability to control things. And should we choose to launch our own currency in whatever format, then we can choose that. As it stands at the moment, economic decisions are made fundamentally to favour London and the South East, and that sometimes is to the detriment of Scotland and other areas of the UK.
Anything you want to add to that, Ivan?
Oh yeah, could talk about this stuff all night, but we need to move on at some point. There's a saying we use in business, sharp businessmen use, which is turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And just because you're big doesn't mean it's good, right? Yeah. The wealthiest countries and the happiest countries and the most successful countries and the most responsive countries and the most well-balanced countries and the fairest countries are the ones we went through earlier: Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Luxembourg, Switzerland, etc., etc., etc. I mean, that's the benchmark, and the question is, why is Scotland so far behind those countries? And the only difference is we've got much better natural resources than most of them, etc., etc. The only thing you can look at and say, well, it's because we've been in the Union.
Remember that is a statement of fact. Sometimes here we're talking about opinion. Unfortunately, for what Ivan's saying, that is a statement of fact.
If we'll move on for the currency. We've got about 20 minutes left. Can I have a quick show of hands? Assuming we have an independent Scotland, can we hands up with the three options? Who would rather use the pound, euro, or a new Scottish currency? Who would rather be within the pound, the UK sterling? The euro? Nobody? And an independent Scottish currency? Or the Bitcoin? The Bitcoin? Yay! I was more interested in that thing about Norway having more expensive pints, personally, but there you go. Is there anyway a different question that's moving on for that subject? Is there a woman there next to the pillar? Woman.
What about the National Health Service? Is there anything about that at all?
In what respect?
Like, are we going to have our own National Health Service, or are we going to break away from the UK?
Well, we already have our own National Health Service, and we always have had. It has always been, even before devolution, it was an independent, separate National Health Service.
Would that still be the same if we were...
Well, yeah, we wouldn't suddenly merge with a UK health service. It is distinct. It's always been distinct. But there's another important point to realise, that as things are cut back and it's progressively privatised in England, that will have a corresponding cut in Scotland's budget, and through the back door would result in hard choices and decisions here. So if you care about the NHS and you want to keep it, it is quite clear you need to vote yes.
Anyone else on the subject of health or the NHS? Or yeah, there's a man down there below the pillar.
Talking about that, the rights of disabled workers. I'm disabled myself, and I know it's very hard for anybody to get a job these days, but I've certainly found it's especially difficult for people like me. I'm a qualified mechanical engineer, but I suffer from epilepsy, which is something that restricts the places and the jobs I can do quite severely. So the current legislation that's available is as much use as a chocolate teapot, quite honestly. So what would be done by an independent Scotland to improve the legal backup to people and actually be able to enforce it with companies?
Could something be done?
The question I would ask is, well, what do you want to be done? So remember, what we're talking about here is a framework for governance and control of our country, which gives us the ability to make choices that reflect on what we regard as important. So we're not here, we're not politicians to make policy promises. That is for a future government of an independent Scotland. However, it is clear that we do have the ability to make decisions and choices in what we value. And actually, it's not just yourself. I can appreciate that must be a very difficult position, but the level of unemployment is simply inexcusable. I don't accept that this concept that that's just an acceptable outcome of our society. It is not. We are a wealthy country. People deserve to be in work. I personally would like to see that changed, and I can only assume that a Scottish government elected by the Scottish people with their best interests at heart would also see likewise.
Certainly. I mean, there was In the paper tonight, it said there was 25 jobs in a new Tesco in the West End, and 1,000 people applied for them, which is disgraceful.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But a few years ago, certain companies over a certain size had a duty to employ a certain percentage of their staff from disabled people, and that was swept away with some airy-fairy idea that everybody had to be treated as equal, but there was no way of enforcing that or validating that. So what would be done in an independent Scotland? Would something of that nature be brought back in?
Well, you would hope so, but I mean, what we something I even referred to earlier about the most most equal countries, or sometimes the smaller Northern European ones. The most unequal countries are the UK, the USA, and one of the major things for any economy is to bring people into the workforce. It's not just disabled people, young people, people that are outside of the workforce. In Norway, actually, Norway's economy gains more from the fact that they have universal free childcare or cheap childcare, and that women participate in the economy in an equal basis, and they gain more for that than they do for the oil fund. That's an actual fact. So in an independent Scotland, you have a chance to create something a bit fairer, something that's aiming towards what the rest of the Northern European, the smaller European nations do. And irrespective of how the currency works or anything like that, these are the most fair and the most equal societies. And unfortunately, some of the richest and biggest ones are the most unequal.
Certainly, but there has to be a valid, enforceable framework that is going to be workable for everybody to make that contribution.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not just having some sort of theory that's supposedly going to be.
I would agree. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There.
Yeah.
And everyone's got to.
So you need to judge
Yep.
how a percentage likelihood, the best predictor of future outcomes are most recent or past outcomes. So looking at the most recent past within the UK framework, or looking to the possibility of Scotland taking control and Scotland's people making choices, what do you consider is the most likely outcome for specific situations such as yourself? Looking at the past evidence, I don't see it as likely. The UK government framework has made it quite clear that vast sections of our society are expendable. And I don't think that's right. I think it's outrageous, actually.
Do you have any other questions on the sort of general issue of equality? Somebody maybe we've not heard from before, the woman just in front of you there? No, we've had two questions for you before. If we could let
Can I just finish this off?
No, sorry, but you've had two questions and there's people here wanting to get in. If we could just pass it down a bit.
All I was saying was it was up to us, like the lady on the panel said. It's up to us to choose. It's up to us to sort out disability rights when we get an independent Scotland.
Yep.
Is this right?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just coming to ask you something about what you said about, although you're not a politician or any political group, you were talking about defining a constitution if we did become independent. So would that then mean that you have a written constitution which includes workers' rights and includes equality on a maximised scale? Because, like, I'm a young person and it's quite hard to find a job that is balanced between learning, it's balanced between equal pay, and also being treated fairly by managers or workforce employers. Because whenever I've heard people go to work or they get a job, they find it hard to negotiate with managers about their timetables, because they're like me, they go to college, so they need to devote both times to it, and the only time that they get that is whenever they get offered a 0 hours contract, which is no guarantee of proper work or proper job, and they get sacked at the last minute before any notice. So would an independent Scotland not focus on that as a primary sort of issue for its inequality in workforce?
Well, I mean, you would hope so, but again, there's quite a lot of this as a blank canvas. You know, we are starting again, and you would hopefully imagine, and I think there is a certain amount of evidence for that, even in the Scottish Parliament and devolved powers we have, not just with the current government, even in the previous Labour and Liberal administration, we did bring in things like free care for the elderly. These things that there is an indication there that maybe not so much that we are more fair-minded, but the parties certainly believe that you have to bring in sort of fair-minded policies and able to win the votes and win the elections. Is there anything else basically on that, on the general subject of equality and fairness? We already had one there. What about the Constitution? We had a brief mention there on the idea of a written Constitution. Is there anybody got any questions on a Scottish Constitution and a new? No? Yes, at the back there. Yeah.
Thank you, that's a bit better. I think it was Michelle who said that there had been some resistance from the legal sector initially, but that seems to be changing. And I wonder if you could tell us more about that.
Well, I mentioned earlier I live in Edinburgh, and its legal establishment is fairly well established and fairly traditional, and you might assume that there was a great deal of resistance. But when I go out and about and talk to them, there's one person in particular, and I'd said to that she's the head of quite a large company there, and I'd said to her, if you knew Scotland was going to be independent, where would you be positioning your company, and where would you be positioning yourself? And all of a sudden she was like, yes, so if there are plans to be setting up a sovereign wealth fund, well, that could be coming into my company because many of them have a variety of disciplines. And also realising that the link in governmental terms was going to be much, much shorter, and therefore her capacity to influence things also made a big difference. And we've got quite a lot of active lawyers as part of Business for Scotland. We had an article the other day by a chap called Brandon Malone, who's the chair of the Scottish Arbitration Centre and a senior partner of one of the law firms in Edinburgh. He's very much in favour, and he's starting to challenge things. Because if you think about it from a Scots law perspective, it's reasonable, based on previous evidence, that Scotland will have an independence bounce as the eyes of the world look to Scotland afresh. Now, we have our own distinctive legal system, and there's only one set of lawyers that can transact that business. Oh yes, that'll be our own Scottish lawyers. So, in general terms, they're starting to wake up to the opportunities.
Any more questions on?
Is it possible to change the subject at this point?
Yes, yeah, move on. We've only got 10 minutes or so left, so
yeah.
Let's cram in as many subjects as possible.
It's just a question about the nuclear weapons programme. If Scotland was to keep the nuclear deterrent, would we be able to afford it? And if we weren't able to afford it, would we be able to sell it to the UK at all?
Wow. Sell it on eBay?
Wow. Well, not sell it, but keep it running, but rent it.
I think that, I mean, in terms of what ifs, buts, maybes, the reality is that after independence, Trident's going to go. I mean, that's SNP policy, and I don't think even if Labour was to win that election, they're all pretty much against Trident anyway. The only reason that they kind of dance round it is because at a UK level, they keep it for various electoral reasons. But I think it's a non-issue in terms of that's what would happen. It'd be part of the negotiation. The white paper, I think, says it's going to go within the first term of the first Parliament, which would be by 2020, 2021. So it would be part of the negotiation, and it'll be an interesting part of the negotiation because it's a very strong hard card for Scotland to be holding at that stage in terms of how that transfer works. But it's going to go.
Would we not lose, like, if we lost the jobs, would we not lose money in terms of the jobs?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify on that, the number of jobs that are dependent on Trident, if you exclude the folk that are working on the submarines, who are going to be working on the submarines anyway, as long as the submarines are still there, the folk at the base that are related to Trident is about 500. Okay, so in the scheme of things, the Scottish Defence Force is going to have 15,000 manning power level in it. So in the scheme of things, it's not a number. Faslane is going to be a base for the Scottish Defence Force after independence. So there isn't going to be net job losses in that sense.
So they're not talking about scrapping the bases as such?
No. And if you go through the white paper, there'll be detail in there, and there was a paper that came out a few weeks ago which kind of went through the defence stuff in a lot of detail. that I've read. I've not looked at the white paper, so that'll all be in there as well. But it'll define what bases are going to be there, how big the Defence Force is going to be, how much of it's going to be Navy, Air Force, Army, how many ships there's going to be, how many aircraft there's going to be, what type they're going to be. I mean, all that detail is there to go and look at.
Is there anyone else with any other questions on new subjects? I can also point out there that it's actually Scottish Labour Party policy to anti-Trident. I'm sure it was 1996 conference, just nobody's told any of the leaders. It's not been overturned since.
Oh, hello. Oh, hi, sorry. Everybody's talking about lots of worthy subjects, so sorry to bring it down to the base level of telly. But I'm just wondering, in the white paper, I work in TV, and the white paper today was very interesting seeing the plans for the new BBC, which would be the Scottish Broadcasting Corporation. Yeah. And it was very interesting seeing the figures, and obviously for my career looking at that and seeing how that would affect a multi-million industry up here. And it might be a very simple question, but I just wonder how much input or conversation have you actually had, or the Yes campaigns had, with the BBC about the potential relationship that the SBC would have with the BBC, because it sounded very good, but I wondered if that was based on a wish or actual conversations that you'd had.
I'll talk you through that. I mean, in terms of what conversations people have had with people, the answer is I don't know, because I've not been involved in those conversations. But looking at the depth of thinking and work that's going on in the white paper, there will have been conversations with people. But if you take a step back and have a think about this, so when Scotland goes independent, organisations like the BBC, and the same applies to the DVLA and the MOD and everybody you want to name that's funded through UK taxes, they're going to lose 9.9% of their revenue on day one, right? So in the BBC's terms, the BBC's funded to about £3.5 billion through licence fees, etc. 320 million of that comes from Scotland, Scottish licence fee payers. The amount that's spent in the BBC in Scotland is about 120 million. So there's a huge gap between the amount of money that goes into BBC centrally and how much gets spent on Scottish broadcasting. So if you're the Director General of the BBC and you're sitting on your budget in 2016, you're losing 320 million from your revenue. You're only losing 120 million from your cost base. You've got a 200 million black hole on day one. The first thing you're going to do is pick up the phone to the guy in Edinburgh that's running the Scottish Broadcasting Service or in Glasgow and say, how's about we do a deal? Okay, that's what they're going to do, because they don't have any choice. And the same thing is going to happen right through a whole range of UK government bodies. So the idea that they'll throw their toys out the pram and walk away and not want to talk to you anymore isn't the real world in terms of business or in terms of anything. So that's what's going to happen. You've got to remember, you know better than me, but a huge amount of the BBC output is subcontracted to third parties or bought in from other countries, or it's independent companies that make the films or the documentaries or whatever and sell them onto the BBC, plus sell them all over the place. And game shows, you go into any country in the world, you'll see all the same game shows translated into Turkish or Chinese or whatever you want, right? They're everywhere, right? X Factor, you name it. So all of that stuff's international and it's all traded. And if you've got a pot of money, which we will have in terms of Scottish licence fees to go spend, then you'll be able to do that. The thing I think is interesting is the people in senior levels in the BBC must have thought this through, because from their career point of view and the opportunity for them to have a much bigger organisation to run has got to be a great opportunity for them. And I'm sure that they've probably sat down in a quiet moment and thought, you know what, that would be pretty good for the BBC or the SPC and their role in it going forward.
And just to add to that, again, going back to first principles, from my point of view, it's almost like this kind of double think idea where we've transmitted stuff from traditional media generally, and you're having to do this kind of auto-delete. That doesn't apply to us. That doesn't apply to us. That doesn't apply to us, because routinely, so much of the broadcast and the traditional media is beamed from a London and South East perspective. And I'm not talking about we have an SBC that suddenly is quite parochial and inward looking. I'm talking about one that really underpins a cultural revival, enables us to take our place in the world stage and look outwards. And that considerable more spending located here, driving and supporting our dynamic ideas and looking outwards, that's what we're interested in seeing. And it just simply doesn't happen at the moment. And you have commonplace misunderstandings about, like my daughter's economics teacher said, what will happen about the health service? No, the health service is already here. So where's she getting that? She's probably getting that from watching the BBC News. So there's huge opportunity there. It can only be better, and we'll still get Doctor Who.
Yeah, we definitely still with Doctor. We've actually got, we were sent a statement earlier from Alex Salmond about the Doctor Who situation. He says, not only will we be able to see Doctor Who, we'll also make our own Scottish version called Doctor Who, which will be much better than all that English shite. That's what it says. That's a fact, by the way. Moving on, any other further questions? Is the women in the middle here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, that I personally have found this a very useful meeting in terms of the information that's been provided in the discussion. And it's really a question for the organisation, Business Scotland. This audience actually probably represents the current situation in terms of who might or might not vote yes in the referendum, because it is disproportionately male, and I think I'm fair in saying most of us are not between 16 and 24. So I just wondered if you've got strategies for being able to reach a women's audience that fills the gaps that lots of women have got regarding their practical apprehensions about the referendum, and similarly young people between 16 and 24 who might not be as engaged as I thought they would be, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, I mean, you're right, that is a concern. So looking at the scope of Business for Scotland, I mean, sometimes I despair because I think, there's so much to do, if you like, in terms of talking to people. And we find this sort of thing very, very valuable as well, and taking on people's views. But we're specifically focusing around Business for Scotland, and that's our scope, if you like. The wider Yes campaign, we're autonomous to them, but the wider Yes campaign, I do know, is looking at both kind of women and young people and has various measures in place. And you're right, it is a concern. I think probably some of the stuff around that came out of the white paper, specifically choosing to target to make life easier for families, of which women, I know, being a working mum, often bear the brunt of kind of carrying and supporting the family. There are specific measures in there. But we especially, there's not that many people at the age of 16 who are running their own business, so we've specifically focused on that. But I share your concerns, and I do know the Yes campaign are doing something about it, but it's not something we're actively involved in.
Can I just ask quickly, do you not think so that I thought the presentation really helped me, yeah, and so I'm not an economist, and it filled a few gaps
Neither am I.
in terms of questions that I had. Is there not a way that, I know what you're saying, that you're directly towards business, but it would seem to me that there's a lot of women and a lot of young people who would appreciate that kind of input. So it's like, how do you make sure that if you can't do it directly, I'm not sure that other organisations will.
Well, I think we can, and we're quite comfortable. You've got to remember, I mean, we're like everybody else. We're starting off from a blank bit of paper 6 months ago and getting a website up and getting 1,000 people to sign up to our thing and getting a board in place and getting folk in doing work and getting an office and getting, I mean, we're just building the thing up and getting local groups and getting meetings. We've had 4 or 5 meetings on the business side of 100 people plus now, and it's great to do events like this, and part of our strategy now is to take that economic message out to a wider audience. So we are delighted to do that. We've communicated to Yes groups. We're delighted to go and do that wherever, and we get invites coming up to several forums now. So if anybody has got another group that they want us to come and talk to, then get in touch with us. We're very happy to take that message out. The fact that it's gone out on the YouTube as well, I think, is powerful, because that helps to communicate it more broadly as well.
The other thing, the other thing I would add as well is I made a personal decision to get involved in this, because I describe myself as always politically aware, never politically active. I really felt that I personally had to stand up and say, no, this is what I think and believe, in the full knowledge that I mean, certainly 6 months ago, there weren't all that many women, particularly in business, who were prepared to do that, because I really felt that it was quite important. I said, no, this is what I believe, because I think genuinely we've got a very powerful message. We're not taking a political position. We won't lose our jobs if we stand up and do this. What I'm saying, I genuinely believe, and I therefore think that other women, it'd be great to see other women doing that as well, and that's just a personal decision I've made. So I've not received any eggs yet, but don't really. I'm sure.
We've got time for. I don't think there's also a group, Women for Independence. I think there's somebody here for Women for Independence tonight. Yeah, and who are trying to combat those particular issues. We've got time for one more question.
I was going to ask Jim, if you don't mind, can we, unless instead of making one more question, we're really short on time. It would be fantastic if, because it's it's kind of like all of us and just a few guys there. I want to try and balance it out. If we've got like 30 seconds or 1 minute, just shout out anything that's on your mind about this discussion, about this presentation. Let's do it. Let's bust it out. I want to hear from everybody, and then we'll ask for a conclusion or a final statement from each of the panel. So what's on your mind, ladies and gentlemen? Just shout it out.
Thanks. Thank you.
What's it? I mean, for me,
I can talk about IFS. I can talk about that all night.
Listen, we don't. Do we want to start a slagging match? Do we want to do that?
Can we talk about IFS?
No.
And maybe in your last statement, you'd maybe like to do so. Has anyone else got anything that's not been mentioned? Just shout it out. What was that?
Truth, honour, integrity, personal accountability. Well, seriously, so we do talk a lot about the economic case, but one of the reasons I think our message is quite powerful, because I genuinely believe what I'm saying. If I hadn't said to my dad, you know what, Dad, I don't think I'm going to be a trainee clerkess in the electricity board, I wouldn't have ended up where I am today. I've worked hard and I've made a lot of mistakes, along the way, but generally speaking, I've kind of pushed myself a wee bit out of my comfort zone. And going back to that kind of fear of change, I've been required to do that. So sometimes I know in various roles I've done, I've stuck my head above the parapet and said, yes, I can do that, in the full knowledge that actually at that point in time I probably couldn't really. And that maybe you could say that's a bit of blagging, but sometimes it's just a bit of self-confidence. And I think that's what we need to do here. This is a massive opportunity for us to create the type of society we want. And it's not just about wealthier, it's also about fairer and more socially just to me, and that's really, really important. And being honest, this is an opportunity. I don't want to be hidebound to something that sells it to me as it's okay, or somebody tells me it's so scary, just you get back in your box, dear. I'm not prepared to do that personally.
Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds on the IFS, so that's all we've got. If you want to read more, there's a bunch of stuff on the Business for Scotland website about it, and I also did a part of a podcast at the weekend when I gave about 5 or 6 minutes on it. But very, very quickly, first thing with the IFS report is it quotes the actual facts of what's actually happening in Scotland's economy, which mirrors the numbers I just showed you. So if you go and read the IFS report, you'll get the same numbers I've just put up. Scotland generates more tax, has done for 30 years, etc., etc. That's all it's in the IFS report. The second thing they did was in the short term, which is now out to about 2020, 2021, they took the OBR forecasts, the UK Government Office of Budget Responsibility forecast for the oil price. I've got a graph I can show you. It shows you six different oil price projections over the next number of years. 5 of them go up and only one goes down, and that's the OBR. The UK government's DECC, Department of Energy and Climate Change, has got oil price going up to about 125 at the same time as OBR has got it going down to about $90. So they're completely out of step with everybody else. And the other thing they did is they took the OBR numbers for the UK economy. So every time you hear on the news the UK has had to downgrade its growth forecast, that's because the OBRs over optimistically forecast the growth in the UK economy. So they always do that. There's quotes from all kinds of people, Peter Mandelson, Alistair Darling, Nick Clegg, saying how out of touch the OBR is with reality. That I can show you as well. So that's what we did in the medium term. So that sets up the picture.
that says, okay, the UK is going to get better and oil price is going to collapse, Scotland's going to get worse, be scared, be scared. And then what they did was took a 50-year horizon, 50 years, right? So that's like going back to 1963 and predicting what the world was going to be like today, right? It's just like so bizarre, you can't even comprehend it. Even Doctor Who struggles with that one. So they did that out to 2063, and it's driven, the economy is basically driven on the population growth. And what they've said is over the 50 years, the UK population over 50 years is going to grow by 28%, and the Scottish population is going to grow by, you get it, 4%. Right, okay. So they took those numbers, fed them in a great big spreadsheet. The IFS took those numbers, put them in a big spreadsheet and cranked the handle. And you know what? The maths is right, because the IFS have got a whole bunch of wonderful spreadsheet monkeys sitting there keying buttons all day, but garbage in, garbage out. If you put in a different set of numbers, you get completely different results, right? And if you think about Scottish population, there's 700,000 Scots working in the rest of the UK. The Scottish economy takes off, a lot of them will be looking to come back. And who are those people? Those are young, professional, educated people in the prime of their career, etc., etc. Exactly the kind of people you want to change that demographic. See, when you talk about immigration back into Scotland, you're talking about immigration in a very broad sense, because there will be people from Eastern Europe or from other parts of the world, but a large part of that is going to be expat Scots coming back to take part in the economy driving forward.
And it's worth pointing out about that who the IFS are, because they were founded in, I think, 74 or something, a group of right-wing bankers, basically, who were founded because James Callaghan's government had brought in capital gains tax and corporation tax. So that's who they are, that's their background, and that's the reaction to that.
Sorry, just one I forgot. The IFS piece of work they've done 3 reports on the Scottish economy, was funded by the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, which is funded by the Vince Cable's UK Government Department of Business. So that's the money route coming, and who plays the piper.
Vested interest, I think.
And I think I'll finish up with...
Can we do that? That would be fantastic.
I'll finish up with... I'll sum up with...
Just before we do this, just to let you know that everything's been filmed this evening. If you do not want to appear, if you want to be one of the blurred out faces, go and speak to David Cherry, who's waving his hand right now, from Cherry Man Media. If you don't want to be involved with that,
can you get one of those bloody pixelated?
You can be the blurry. You can be the blurry one. Can we get a blurred head on the stage?
A real blurred head.
I just want to thank everybody for coming along and for being part of this, and especially to Business for Scotland and Jim Monaghan. And I think Jim's going to tie it up for this time.
I'm just going to finish with, as Crawford said at the start, I'm a poet. That's mainly what I do. All the other sort of political things are just how I pay my rent. And I'm just going to sum up with a wee poem that I wrote a couple of years ago called Joke, Thomson and Ivan McKee, and it's about the idea that we're much the same as anybody else, and that next year, really the most important question, like most nations and most people, will be, in the summer of next year, we'll be looking at the televisions and wondering about that really important question is, will we ever qualify for another World Cup finals ever again? So that's my poem, Joke, Thomson and Ivan McKee. Scottish football's in the dock. It seems that we're a laughing stock of Europe. No longer will we see the day when the likes of Cooper, Hansen, Paul McStay, Baxter, Johnston, Dennis Law, the artists of the Tanner Ball will grace the greatest stage on earth to show the world what we are worth. But as our team face many tankings and slip further down the FIFA rankings, maybe we should ponder whether that list of heroes even ever played together. I mean, it was the McNeil that lifted up the 1966 World Cup. 4 years later, we didn't even go to the classic finals in Mexico, but then I'm sure that David Hume did not meet Irvin Welsh or Walter Scott. James Macmillan never will debate with Peden. But it's the same for Poland and the same for Sweden. For Marie Curie never got a call for Copernicus or Pope John Paul. So I know we like to greet and whinge and exercise the Scottish cringe, but let's face it, just like most small nations, we sometimes rise above our station. So don't mope when it doesn't go your way. Rejoice when the wee dog has its day. We've aye been mediocre, we've never been great, but let's enjoy and celebrate the times, the beautiful times, when we punch above our weight. Thank you.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, please, for our panel. And can I remind you that everything has been filmed.